So, just hopping right into it. Obviously, today we've got a new entrant to the Phoenix podcast, Luda Kogan, attorney, specialist in judgment recovery, and as always, Brian Bauer, president, founder, CEO of Phoenix. Welcome, Luda.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Scott. Man, my attorney hat never stops working. I have to correct you. I can't legally say that I'm a specialist under Florida law. So let's just say I focus on judgment recovery.
Okay, we'll put the five-line qualifier on the bottom of that. It is a big decision. Do not. Um, so Luda, I don't want to step on anything. Do you want to give a full sort of introduction, who you are, what your background is, how you got into this category?
Sure. So I'm a lawyer that's licensed only in the state of Florida, right? So anything we talk about today is really going to be within the scope of Florida law. I've been licensed in Florida since 2009, so it seems like a very long time right now. And for the bulk of that time, I have been doing post judgment work or asset recovery, if you wanna look at it that way. But the most of my legal work really centers around helping my clients find assets if they've already won their cases and try to recover those assets using the court system.
Great. So, now Brian, since you're not an attorney, I am able to say that you are an asset search specialist. You've been doing probably more of these in the last 30 years than any man walking the earth. Um, how did you 2 get hooked up?
Yeah, so good question. Here recently, Luda had a situation and a client that's trying to recover on a judgment, and we got to talking and understood. Wow, she really knows her stuff and understands the nuances. And immediately, I was telling her, "Oh, you need to be on the podcast," because I get these questions all the time, not only from investigative, but legal. And I think that there's a big perception out there of, boy, I just get my judgment and, just people pay. And then, hey, my attorney's really not doing anything. They were good to get me the judgment, but, I don't really know where to go. And so, how do I collect on my money? So as Luda and I were talking and sharing experiences, clearly it was obvious to me that she could shed some light for the audience, really about how an attorney does go about collecting on all facets of judgments, as well as maybe you can speak to Luda a little bit about why not all attorneys are created equal when it comes to asset recovery.
Yeah, absolutely, Luda. I can say before I came across Brian in Phoenix, I never gave any thought past, okay, the judge's gavel hits and decides in favor, and then the money wires into my account and everyone's happy. And it turns out that's not the case at all. How does it work?
Yeah, so the thing that comes to mind is what people love to say that a judge that they have a bathroom full of final judgments, right? Because if it's a piece of paper, it's worth what it's worth. So what's interesting is that the bulk of my cases come from lawyers that do just this, right? They're great lawyers. They win their cases. They know what they're doing. But now that there's a judgment, that's kind of where their expertise or specialty or realm of knowledge ends. And it's because you kind of have to know a few things, right? You have to know what assets are collectible, right? What assets can I possibly look for that I can use to satisfy this judgment or take to pay the judgment. You have to know how to do it. Usually it's very statutory, meaning the law kind of governs all the steps you have to take. And also, should you do it, right? Is just because there's an asset out there doesn't mean it's worth going after. And the reason I look at all three things is because I never want to have a client who spent all this money paying a lawyer to win their case and now has to pay more money to go after an asset that may not even be worth it. Right. So I try to look at all aspects of it to make sure that resources are being invested in the right spot to get the best recovery for the client. And that's really just even that those are the main three things I think. Why it's probably better to use somebody who does asset recoveries kind of legal work, because it's just something that you learn from experience sometimes, right? Like, having done this for so long, I'm like, okay, I've done this. I know it's not worth it. Let's move on, right? And that's just because I've done it. For lawyers that haven't done it, it doesn't mean they're bad lawyers. They just don't have the same experience.
You know, a lot of times when Brian and I talk about his cases, there's this concept of pattern recognition that comes up over and over again. And we think, you know, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. Is that how a lot of your interactions start, is go find this? And then sometimes there's an assessment that says there's not enough there? Or what does that look like when an attorney goes and reaches out to you?
Yeah, of course. There's only so much, by the way, that I can do, right? Florida, fortunately for me and other lawyers that do what I do, Florida is very good with public records, right? We can find a lot of information online. Other states, I've learned over the years, are not as public record friendly. So, but even with as great as Florida is with our public records, there's still things that I can never look at on my own, right? I can't find someone's bank account. I can't find someone's brokerage account, right? That's, for example, how what I would ask Brian for, or companies like Phenix. Um, so whenever lawyers come to me, it's really difficult for me to make that initial assessment, because if there's nothing in the public records, or there is, but it's not great, that doesn't tell me that's the end of the road, because I know there's assets out there that I just don't have access to. So I will tell the lawyers, like, hey, let's take it step by step. Let's do maybe an asset search if the judgment is worth it, or if they know enough about the individual to think there might be something there. Once we get the report back, then we talk about, okay, here's what they found, here's what we can do with this asset, and here's why we should or should not do it based on price points, based on chances of success, right? Florida is what we call very debtor friendly. We have a lot of protections, right? So just because an asset is out there doesn't mean it's out there to be collected. Some things are protected. So we kind of look at that as well.
What is a typical engagement that brings you to call Brian? Like, what type of case would lead you to reach out to a Phoenix Investigations?
Um, well, for example, the case that I'm working with Brian on right now, it is a pretty hefty judgment that is about to be signed. And, we know enough about the person to know that he is collectible, he and she, it's two people, and that there's going to be something out there, right? So when I look at a judgment and I see that, hey, this is going to be a six-figure judgment, it's based on what I've already seen in the public records. I think these people have something there. I know I can't find it myself. So I call Brian and we engage in asset investigation. And then based on Brian's report, I will, get with the client and say, okay, here's what was found, or here's what was not found, right? Sometimes the things that are not found also make me raise an eyebrow. For example, if I know that someone recently sold a home and they don't find any bank accounts, I have so many questions, right? And that's pretty much how we move forward.
Brian, what is the first, when Luda reaches out to you, what's the first couple questions that you ask her to try and determine your next steps or your strategy?
Yeah, usually one, does the client have stomach for it, right? And so oftentimes the clients are very torn, right? They spent all of this money in litigation to get this document. Believe at the end of the day, we've all seen Aaron Brockovich, right? Right. And so it's like, hey, we go and get this big verdict, but now, how do we go collect on it, right? And so, having that tough conversation with the client up front to say, hey, all we can do is turn over these stones, but what does it look like if you do nothing, right? And so trying to be proactive, and what I try to coach clients on is really you have to be aggressive. You have to go on the offense, or ultimately, most of the time, your judgment's not going to be satisfied. So for me, it's more important to work with attorneys that, one, understand that we make a good team and we can do things and get information that they can't. But on the flip side, clients are coming to me quite often and saying, "Oh, what do I do now that you found this asset? How do I go? How do I enforce it? How do I collect on it?" And things. So really, I work with so many attorneys that get it and understand and use not just us, but investigators in general is really a secret weapon, because oftentimes attorneys get stuck and want to litigate and want to go forward and want to be aggressive, but they don't know where to go next. So to be able to provide that information to Luda so she can use her expertise is super important.
Luda, how often are you reaching out to private investigators like Phoenix in your work?
Oh, very often. Very often because and I don't know, obviously I've worked with bigger companies and I've worked with smaller companies when it comes to investigators. And there's also like I said, cost benefit analysis really comes into play in the post judgment world, especially when clients have paid so much money in attorney's fees and now they're like, man, we still have to keep going, right? So I try to be strategic, and not every case for me is going to be a complete asset search. Turn everything upside down, turn over every stone, because as amazing as that would be, if a client has a $10,000 judgment, they're not paying $5,000 to do this type of investigation. So I work with different companies and we have different scopes of work. So if it's a smaller judgment, maybe we'll just do a limited search for bank accounts, for example, because that's going to be the easiest and fastest way if there is one. um but I wanna say that anytime I have a judgment, I'm doing some type of asset, search.
I think that makes a lot of sense because it goes back to, you have to do some sort of expected value
Of
calculation.
course.
And if the math makes sense, then it's time to take the next step. Is it as straightforward as that? And your expertise allows you to make those expected value
Yeah,
decisions.
yeah, and I'll even add to Luda's point. What I see oftentimes is sometimes for the client, it was a personal friend that they loaned a bunch of money to, or they got in business with, and sometimes it's very emotional for the client. And at the end of the day, they are prepared to scorch earth and spend money and understand maybe the probability of recovery. But if it's the opportunity to maybe get their last 10,000 or their $20,000, clients kind of, oftentimes are all in. So it's important for the transparency of it, and coaching the client through. And that's why I thought it was so important to, hear from Luda's perspective from the legal side. And maybe you could share a story or two, Luda, certainly as an investigator going into this thing. And sometimes you think, oh boy, there's not going to be much there. And I'm going to try my very best. And then it even surprises you. And then you find an account with $2 million in it, or you find crypto or, things like that. So maybe you can share one or two stories with us, Luda, of maybe that same mindset, and then what a positive outcome
Well,
was.
I think the most perfect story to share, only because I know Phoenix, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Phoenix does more than just asset investigation. I think you guys also do kind of boots on the ground work.
Yes.
So I had a case where an ex-wife, and those are always fun, right? When it's an ex-spouse, because that's the personal feelings, and you do whatever you have to do. I will pay whatever I have to pay. I had a former wife who had a judgment from a different state, and because that's part of it. When we have judgments from one state, we can enforce it in a different state. If that's where the asset is, that's where the enforcement has to be, where the asset is. And the beauty of Phoenix is that they will search assets all over the country, so we can kind of figure out where the collection has to be. But anyway, this woman comes to me out of somewhere from the West Coast, and her deadbeat ex-husband is here, and he's kind of a nomad, right? He has a trailer and he just travels in his trailer, and he stops at trailer parks, and that's how he lives. And he's got a boat and a truck that he tows. And obviously, the hard part is when somebody's not stationary, how do you find them? Because you need the sheriff to go and pick up these things. And this was a few years ago, and the company that I used pretty much, well, I used an asset company and then I used the private investigator. So it's really convenient when it's all in one. In that instance, it wasn't. So my private investigator tracked this guy to somewhere in the middle of Florida. We knew from an asset search that he had the boat, that he had the car, that he had the RV, a mobile home. Um, and he would find him, and I would prepare the paperwork for the sheriff, and I would send it to the sheriff. And then, by the time the sheriff goes out, the guy was gone. But my investigator kept tracking him, and I think I must have tracked him to 3 different counties. And every time I submitted the paperwork, he just kept moving. But that's the nomad lifestyle. But this man was a character, and he got arrested. And I think I had the mobile park call me and say, hey, by the way, the guy you called us about got arrested. So we sent the sheriff out there, who was very cooperative. And by the time the guy got out, we had his car, we had his boat, and we had his mobile home. So, the ex-wife was more than happy. It was one of my more complicated collections, but it really, the reason I share the story is because the lawyer cannot do it alone, right? First of all, I'm in South Florida. This was Middle Florida. So I had to rely on professionals to find the asset, but also to track this person who just kept moving around. And in this instance, we were very successful. The efforts paid off. And, the wife got her pound of flesh.
That is funny how much the emotion comes into it. Brian and I always talk that, he kind of acts as like a strategist consultant where you're presented with some options and ultimately the person's going to make a decision, and sometimes it's not rational.
I don't just do the post judgment stuff. I do obviously just general litigation as well. But I think that sometimes the hardest part about being an attorney is being the middle ground, the rational mind, and just telling someone who may be very emotionally invested, this is a business decision that you're making, right? That's how you have to look at it. And sometimes it works, right? Sometimes the client just needs to hear someone say, hey, listen, you did everything right, but this is a business decision. You need to cut your losses and let's just move on. But yeah.
Yeah. And to that, what I try to coach the clients is you have really two options. One, you don't think you can really collect on this, and then you can swallow hard and walk away and, use that money for something good. Or I suspect because you're calling me that you're not prepared to give up on this. And then the only other option is to, um, be aggressive, find those assets, find somebody like Luda that is a pit bull and can get that, information and get that recovery. And it really is, um, that, really black and white of, and being there personally and spending lots of money in, the litigation before against somebody, and having all your chips in the table, and it's a runaway train, and you want to give up, but you've got all this, and it's expensive. At the end, it's very rewarding when, certainly, in my position, to be able to find those assets that people were intentionally trying to hide or fraudulently transfer and putting in other buckets, that you don't find. Really rewarding when it all comes together.
And actually, to that point, one thing that I tell clients is I'm like, look, if they kind of look at the price of what an asset search is, right? And depending on what it is, it can range. What I tell them is that, look, either you pay this company and they do this service for you and you'll get your results in what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, or you pay ultimately the same type of money in costs for the legal process to discover the same information, right? Because there's other ways to find the information, but it's going to take longer. It's going to cause it's more aggravation. It's more court involvement, and so on and so forth. So this is just always a very efficient way to get that initial information. And then and what I always tell them is, look, once you get this information, then we can have a conversation. Is it worth it to move forward? Right? So it even can be like a money saving option, because sometimes moving forward is just, or doing it the other way is going to be more expensive to get the same information.
And Scott, I just had this conversation with an attorney 20 minutes before we
Oh,
started this podcast. And my comment was, oh, okay, probably for about 3K, we can locate it. Whoa, this is really expensive. And I'm saying, okay, you have a $500,000 judgment. How much did we spend in litigation fees? And then
Yeah.
you're determining whether you go the discovery route. How much will that cost? And then ultimately, we lose the element of surprise, right? Because now we're asking the other side, hey, turn over your banking, all of this. But what do they do with those assets? They just move
They
them.
move
And
them
then, so by
right
the time
away.
you get that discovery, they got $1,000 in the bank and
Yeah.
they created another LLC or they moved it to another account that you don't know about. So, to Luda's point, there's it. It really, you can go light speed. You can move very quickly. You can use the element of surprise in order, and then now finding those assets, Luda can immediately go on those financial accounts and not disclose to the other side, and oftentimes, and just levy against those. So it's a very powerful, tool when used correctly.
I mean, I can share a story that is exactly on point on a case I just settled recently. And this case came to me from an attorney who got the judgment. And when lawyers who don't practice in judgment execution, when they get a judgment, the first thing they do is go and do discovery. They know enough to know that we're now entitled to all this financial information, so they go down that rabbit hole. And that's what this lawyer did, which is not wrong, but it's a different type of strategy, right? And it does ruin the element of surprise, because who is going to tell you where their bank account is before they move the money, right? So the attorney that ultimately brought the judgment to me and said, "Look, I'm done here. Can you please help me out?" Um, he's like, "I've been trying to get their financial information. They finally gave it to me, but the accounts are empty." And when I kind of got into the weeds of things, I realized that what this woman did, right at the time she answered discovery, she pulled out $40,000 from her account and transferred it. I mean, I'm not going to get too much detail, and transferred it to somebody she shouldn't have. Right. And I'm like, well, had this attorney paid for a bank account search or an asset search, he would have hit that account. She never would have had that opportunity. And they probably would have collected a lot faster than, me trying to undo everything that's happened and, ultimately getting still a good result. But how much more money did the client spend?
Brian and I speak a lot about the kind of awareness issue of this service. What do you think obviously your attorney peers are not aware, those that are not as experienced as you might be with these types of situations.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's such an awareness issue of the availability of services like Brian's?
I That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think that, at least, you know, I don't know how widely advertised the services are. I mean, listen, I know enough to know there's certain permissions these companies like Brian, Phoenix and Brian have to do the work they do at whatever stage the case is in. I just think that, lawyers are good at what the lawyers do. So if you have a personal injury attorney, for example, right, somebody who deals with car accidents, horrible like incidents and medical claims, they are not worried about how to find assets. They are not networking with companies like this. Who are they networking with? Doctors, right, medical providers, and things like that, insurance companies, whatever. So I think it's because it's not part of the area of law, right? If you have a criminal attorney, if you have an immigration attorney, right? I mean, they're going to focus on the, let's say, vendors or other professionals that can help them do what they do. And what they do is not collection, right? So if you go to an attorney who does anything related to judgments, anything related to collection, they know about asset search companies and they use them as they should, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And um, Scott, I think to answer that question also, I think ultimately, to Luda's point, a lot of attorneys just don't understand that's really a viable avenue, and that there's people like us out there that can find this information. Oftentimes, I think there's a perception because that information is private that you don't have entitlement to that information. But as Luda just mentioned, there's permissible purposes in which to get the laws aren't designed for the bad guys to get away with everything 100% of the time, right? And whether that's FCRA or the GLBA, there's certain permissible purposes in which you can obtain that. So saying that, I think a lot of attorneys don't know where to turn. I always joke tongue in cheek and saying if everybody could find us and knew we were out there, we would be Bill Gates because the reality is there's so much money out there. Our system's broken in the way of all of these people that truly get screwed over, try to do the right thing. There's a whole cottage industry of just taking people's money and being a bad human being and knowing that how the court system works, or I guess more importantly, doesn't work, to really put teeth in on the collection side. So if you don't have somebody like a Luda, it's very hard. And when you start finding and following hidden and transferred assets and things, it can get very complicated. And with crypto now and things internationally as the world shrinks and money moving, there's a lot of people that are very sophisticated, and this is their whole business model to convince me to give a couple $1,000,000 for my great business idea and stick it in your pocket and say, hey, bad for you, Scott, bad business investment, it just didn't pay off, right? And so yeah, I think generally attorneys struggle with that, and certainly from what our perspective is, there's many of my clients that will embrace this and see it as a secret weapon. But there's a group out there that also think, well, we can keep this in house. We can also do this. We can have our paralegal or our junior associate look up this and run public databases. Yeah, but that's not going to move the needle, right? And so understanding, Luda started this conversation by saying, look, it really get the person that has that unique set of skills in order to do that. You wouldn't go to Luda for immigration, right? But vice versa, right?
Please don't. Please don't. Please don't.
Uh, yeah, so I don't think it's mainstream enough yet, I guess, that people realize that, there's real opportunity there.
I guess let me ask and explain like I'm five outsider question. Is there not a business incentive? Say a personal injury attorney, they win a $500,000 judgment, and there's not an incentive to help me collect on that in any way, like for them to reach out to specialists, experienced folks like yourself. Why is there not an incentive to take it to the next step if I'm unable to collect?
Are you asking me or are you
Why
asking?
do we think that that's the case? Like, why would they not be interested or incentivized to explore options past, a paralegal using a public record search?
I Okay, so when it comes to personal injury, for example, it's very rare that it's rare, but it's not but it happens, right? It's rare that I get a personal injury attorney coming to me and saying, "Hey, I have a judgment, can you help me collect?" Right? I've probably done a handful of those. And in personal injury, the beauty of personal injury is that there's an insurance company on the other side, they're going to pay, right?
Mm, okay.
What we're really talking about here are the judgments that are against, even in the personal injury context, against the business that doesn't have, against somebody who doesn't have insurance or not enough insurance, or in your general, like, let's say, landlord tenant case, right? A commercial landlord tenant case, the tenant isn't paying, they get evicted, but that judgment could be in the six figures. There's no insurance there. So when it comes to an incentive, it's because the lawyer who litigated the case and who got the result for the client that they were hired to do, which is evict and get me a judgment for the back rent, right? They did their job. Um, so there's an incentive for the client to collect. I don't know if there would be an incentive for the attorney because they did the job they were hired to do. And quite frankly, what I do appreciate is when lawyers call me and say, look, I could do it, but I know you could do it faster. I know you could give better advice because you've done this so many times. So I think there is an incentive, but I think that incentive is with the client, not the attorney who should, does the right thing when the lawyer says, I did what I'm good at. And now I'm going to pass it on to the next phase where somebody who's good at their job can take it to that next
Yeah,
level.
yeah, absolutely. And Scott, what I see on my end oftentimes is we actually get lots of investigations from those personal injury attorneys because they're saying, oh, the policy limits were 50,000, but my client is a quadriplegic now, and so I don't believe that this person's going to have assets. However, I have to do my due diligence so I'm not sued for malpractice, and I take that settlement from the insurance carrier and write this thing off. So oftentimes we'll do those investigations um, to see, and then whoa, it turns on the spigot again. Oh, I had no idea, or there's a second policy or an umbrella policy, or or those types of things. So the incentive from what I see ultimately is there's attorneys that work on contingency or fee or some hybrid of that, and so it's really hard and handcuffs attorneys like Luda if, well, I don't know if there's anything there or not, and do I want to waste the client's money or resources, or more importantly, the attorney's resources if it's going to be a dry hole and nothing there as well, right? And so, it can be a little tricky, but the motivation ultimately is contingency and find $1 million, and did it for 30% or 35%. There's the motivation, right? So,
And you bring up a good, like, something that I actually also meant to bring up, and it's a good point that the investigation doesn't always have to be because there's a judgment, right? A lot of the times, if you're going into where there's not enough policy limits or whatever else the case may be, how do you know that you want to keep fighting the case? How do you know what kind of settlement you're willing to enter into if you know nothing about the collectability of your defendant? Right. So I am at, because clients come to me with those things once in a while as well. So I imagine, Brian, you have the same experience as you just mentioned, that you have lawyers or their clients coming to you and saying, hey, we need to figure out, are we settling this case or not? Because if there's no assets, then we're just going to settle and move on. If there's assets, then maybe it's worth a little bit of a stronger fight.
Yeah, Brian, like what percentage, just, round numbers, are people looking for help before the judgment versus after the judgment? Is it vast majority after?
now I'd probably say it's probably split up the middle. So we get into some very high dollar potential litigation, or you can imagine being paralyzed or something from somebody's going to need health care the rest of their life. Um, though, so attorneys are coming to us to say, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And so we really need to know in good faith. We also need to tell our client that, right? So if so, what we know, and here's what it is, and we don't think that maybe there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for what we see. Oftentimes, clients will still say, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate that position, but I still think that it's, worth it to try to, go forward for, a myriad of reasons.
Um, Brian, I'm sure there are outliers, but just to give a picture of what does it look like from the time someone agrees to proceed with your services to the time you're submitting your final report, how much time generally passes? Is it days, weeks?
Yeah,
I know you have longer ones, but
good question. Our average asset investigation is 2 or 3 weeks. So really, in the legal world, that's light speed.
yes.
Um, and so I think clients are always pleasantly surprised with that information, that you can get it. To people like Luda who can act quick. Once they obtain that information. So it can happen very quickly. Some can get very complicated and working on tens of millions of dollars of exposure, and sister companies and companies internationally and individuals all over the place. um, then that can be a different story. I don't know if I shared this story, but not too long ago, there was a famous rapper. A client called me and said, "Hey, Brian, I need you to investigate that rapper again." And I was saying, "Which one?" Right? Because go figure. A rapper is irresponsible with their monies, right? Um, but this particular rapper, the client spent at 5K with us. We looked in and we found one bank account with $850,000 on a $3 million judgment. They went
Amazing.
and levied that within a matter of days and were, of course, over the moon excited for a $5,000 spend for, that those don't, happen every day. But, um, so then the client's calling back 6 months later and saying, "Hey, we want you to look into him again." And now he has his Lamborghinis and Ferraris in a lease, right? And in somebody else's name and doesn't own them outright, right? And so, you know, some, somebody educated him along the way, right? And so
Yeah, it's the rapper's playbook, it sounds like.
That's everybody's playbook.
that's
That
every
that is everybody's playbook.
Oh, you're in Florida. Yes.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, that's what happens, once you hit somebody's account, all of a sudden, everything is transferred out, right? And now you need to figure out how to get it back because you could get it back, right? The law doesn't just allow you to transfer away all your assets, but that's another reason why, we want that report. We wanna see what was there 2 weeks ago and what's no longer there a month later, right? And just to put things in context and in perspective as to why this 2 to 3 week turnaround time is actually lightning speed, because if I were to ask for the financial information, the law gives the judgment debtors 30 days to answer, but they could not answer. And then we have to go through the court, and that's 2 more months. The courts are super backed up.
or
Um,
Luda, right? Or they provide you a sack of nothing when you do
or they
get the
give me
document,
nothing.
right?
Exactly. Or they empty everything out and then give it to me, which honestly, I'll even take that over what I get, right? I get a lot of no answer, BS answers, and now I'm tied up in court for 3 months, right? Whereas if I got a report in 3 weeks, I would know what's going on. I can make a better assessment. And if nothing else, I feel like the client would get closure, right? Like, you know what? This case has taken so much of my life, like my mental energy, my money, my this, my that. Where is the end of the road? And sometimes the end of the road is just put it to bed, right? So I think that if nothing else, the client at least gets closure.
What is a kind of a minimum dollar amount? And I know there's emotions involved and there's some things outside of this, but in general, is there a minimum dollar amount where it starts to make sense to engage experts like yourselves to go start barking up the trees? Is that tens of thousands of dollars or is it less?
I mean, I don't know about Brian, but I've had people come to me with, judgments that are 2, 3,000, 5,000. And, I obviously don't do the same type of legal work, nor would I recommend that they pay me to do that, right? I told them right away, I'm like, you'll pay me more than your judgment amount if you want me to just turn everything upside down. I'm like, but here's what we can do. You can get a bank account search, and if something comes up, we'll do a freeze. Let's do that. So I think that there's always like some kind of limited scope that you can offer the client that is commensurate with what the judgment is. But yeah, once in a while I get a client that says, I don't care what it's going to cost. I'm owed this money and I'll pay 10,000 to recover too. I don't necessarily agree with it. And we have all the conversations and we discuss it and we do all the right counseling. And if they want to move forward and it's within the, ambit of the law, then we move forward.
Yeah, yeah, Scott. We're working on one right now. They just got a $7 million judgment, but they spent $2.5 million in litigation to get that $7 million judgment.
Crazy.
So, sometimes it can be wildly expensive. And this is what, to Luda's point, I'm always trying to coach the client is, let me get this straight. You have a $250,000 judgment. You are concerned about paying Luda $2,500, 5,000. You're concerned about paying me 5,000. I have to ask you a question. How much did you pay in litigation to get your $250,000 judgment. And sometimes, 50 grand, 100 grand, oftentimes it's a lot. How long did it take you to do that? Your heartburn factor, all of that. If you cannot see the value in trying to pursue that to get that money for $3,000, the best advice I can give you is swallow hard, walk away. But clients 9.9 out of 10 times are not prepared to do that. So giving them all the facts. And so I think I'm more successful trying to talk the client out of it than I am trying to talk them into it. And um, and so there's tremendous value when you get to the point to where when you're dealing with an asset attorney directly that can work, or with companies like us to get that information quickly. Because it costs very little, but the upside is it can be extremely expensive. And I would argue oftentimes we have way more value than what you spent in order to get the judgment. So
Interesting. I just paid, it's like a contract review, fee, an attorney. It was 690 an hour. I got the fee and I was like, what the hell? Why are people so prone to be okay with spending legal fees? And we know they're professionals and we know the cost of doing business. But when it goes to the PI side, there's a lot more sticker shock. Is it just conditioning or is there something else there?
I think it's the stomach ache, right? Yeah, Luda probably sees this too. It's like, oh God, my attorney in the beginning didn't tell me, oh, I'd have to spend 50,000 in legal fees. I paid a small retainer, and then that was the gift that kept giving, right? And then got to the point to where they just have a gutful, and then they're coming and like, oh God, I have to spend more fees. So they're just absolutely financially beat up and emotionally beat up. To where they don't see the necessity and the tremendous value for $4, right?
Luda,
I,
how do
I
your conversations go in that
yeah,
regard?
I would disagree, Scott, that people love to pay lawyers. Let me just say that you're
Oh, to be
probably
clear,
the best
I did not love it. I just go, shit, I
um
had it.
but
See,
I
I'm
do.
paying him too much, Luda. He's paying 690 an
Yeah,
hour for
he's
an
so
attorney.
happy to pay your
I
way.
cried.
I wish all my clients could be like you. But by the way, side note, highly recommend that everybody hire a lawyer to get their contracts done. Whatever $600 or 1,000 or 1,500 you pay to get that agreement done the right way is so much cheaper than having to litigate a poorly drafted contract 2 years from now when something goes wrong. So that's my free legal advice.
Great
Pay the
advice.
money for the lawyers.
My nervous Nelly software development partner is in there crying tears of joy hearing you say that.
Let me tell you something. We have, a running joke amongst us litigators that, all these people that are using ChatGPT and other formats to prepare their legal documents, the transactional documents, the running joke is whatever money you're saving now, you're going to pay it to us later to fix it. You know what I mean? So use the professionals, use doctors, accountants, lawyers, just use them. They exist for a reason. Anyway, that said, I do agree with Brian. The hardest conversation, I almost every client that comes to me, it's a hard conversation to explain to them why they hired an attorney, won their case, by the way, right? Because if they're coming to me, they won their case, why they still need to do anything else. And I think that Brian's right, that by the time they come to me or to him, they have now spent God knows how many years in court, right? Because usually these things take forever. How much money did they spend to get the result, the good result that they did? And now you mean to tell me I still need to do an investigation. I still need to do all these things to get the money that the court said I am entitled to. So it's almost like pouring salt on wounds, right? And and I do this all the time. I'm like, listen, this is unfortunately the system is not perfect. But you this is where you are now. So let's talk about what we can do to push you forward in the most cost efficient way. Sometimes resources are not a problem, which is great, and sometimes they are, and we kind of have to get creative and say, okay, if you're working with a limited budget at this point, here's what we can do. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. It's just the same as almost any industry that is attached to large dollar amounts. We just don't like it, but unfortunately, that's showbiz and that's how the system's set up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine though, all's relative, right? So we will get hired, and the client will spend 50 or sometimes six figures with us. But um, is that is that worth it to pay 100K when you recovered an additional $2 million that was hidden and you didn't know? Yeah, the answer is yeah, pretty good rate of return on your investment, right? And so it's really big and small, right? And it's everything in between. It's hey, to Luda's point, can we do something, per your budget that would be creative and come up with a solution and still be aggressive. As you can only imagine, can you imagine all the 10K judgments and less that are out there in the world that just the juice isn't worth the squeeze no matter what it is that you do? And so just that bad paper that is out there alone is just, crazy. And now that you start to do that incrementally, starts to blow your mind of like, just, that probably the trillions of dollars that's out there, in the world for bad debt. But I do have a burning question for Luda. Tell me about, you know, uh, ultimately as a client's coming to you and you're trying to educate them, um, uh, where do you typically take it, and how long in your world does it really get from A to Z? And what advice would you give our audience, just as, hey, I have a judgment, I collected, my attorney can't do it, just maybe you can give our audience some free general advice.
Yeah, of course. Well, of course, point number one is going to be consult with a lawyer who does judgment execution, right? That's the first thing you should do. And that's not to say that the lawyer that you currently have um is not a good lawyer. Again, it's some things you learn from experience, right? I can rattle off so much to you right now on the different assets you can collect, the different roadblocks you can have, but it's because I've done it for so long. So you really want to do talk to someone like that. Hopefully that person recommends some type of asset search as well, for all the reasons we've discussed here today. General efficiency, number one, and also cost effectiveness, right? Doesn't have to be the whole gambit of things, but on some level, I think there's always room for an asset search. Um, so when clients do come to me, this is the conversation that we have. Let's look at your judgment. What gave rise to the judgment? What do you already know about this person? Right? Because if the client, sometimes my clients, depending on how the case arose, they know so much information, right? And I'm like, all right, based on this, and also how do you know it, right? That's important. Based on this, I don't think a search like this is worth it. I think you're better off doing this type of search, right? And again, I don't know how other professionals handle it, but I really do try to be considerate of the money the client's already spent and how best to use whatever limited resources may be left, right? And I think that's an important consideration, and I think that goes to transparency, authenticity, and developing that relationship. I also don't like to waste my time. And that's the reality of it. I also think that my time is better spent helping you do what's best for you, right? Not just like running around doing what you tell me to do. So anyways, so yeah, so we have that conversation. We look at how much the judgment is for, what they already know. And then we discuss what possible things could come up in the asset search. And we discuss how long that will take, the collection of that particular asset will take. Some things take longer based on the court, based on the process we need to use. Some things are quicker, but they're more expensive. Some things are, and when I say things, I mean processes to get to the asset, right? Freezing bank accounts, freezing someone's wages, going after business interests. I had a case where we took someone's liquor license. I have a case now where we're going after a trademark, right? It's kind of crazy how everything is almost everything is collectible, with the caveat that state specific. I'm only talking about Florida here. So we talk about those different options, and what the cost of that will be, what the timeline of that will be. I have cases where from open to close we spend 3 months. I have cases that I've litigated for 3 years, right? Some of my more complex judgment collection cases, and I think Brian touched on this, is when things get transferred, right? All of a sudden, the money's not there or the asset's not there, but oh, but the son now has this amazing house. The son's 20 years old and owns a $20 million house. I don't think so, right? There's something not right. So those cases take time because now you're kind of doing a lot more investigation through the court system, right? Because at some point, the investigator services come to an end, right? They just give you the information and then you need a lawyer to figure out what to do with that information and how to do it in a way that gets you recovery, not just makes you spend time and money for nothing. Um, if you want to know a story, I had a a very I'm gonna say it was complicated, but we were collecting against the company that shut down. Right. It was a personal injury case, actually. There was no insurance because the company was shutting down. So my client had a one over $1 million judgment, but like, what is he going to do with it? Right. The company's not there anymore, but we collected it because we knew exactly what to look for. We knew exactly what to do. We clawed back what we could. And it was a great result. Was it 1 million? No. Right. But it was more than zero.
Yeah, and I think also, so where Luda practices in Florida, Scott. I don't know if you're aware of this, but so your homestead is
Mm.
protected. So meaning, and I had a case that we're just kind of wrapping up now, but uh, very very good trader for a big international bank who trades millions of dollars, uh, calls the bank and says, "Hey, on this stock, I want to short this stock." And they said, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely not. Don't short it." He takes millions of dollars with his conviction, and the stock goes from like 8 to 24 dollars overnight. And by the way, that's the wrong direction for those
Yeah.
people that don't understand the short. So so knowing that he's told no and he's lost something like $20 million already, he decides with great conviction to take even more money and do it again, and it proceeds to go up again to where I think he had lost $48 million in the matter of 48 hours. And so the bank intervenes, kind of shuts him off at that point, everything. Um, what does he do? He transfers his cash out, and then he has a homestead in South Beach on the water for about $18 million, and you can't touch it. Right. You paid in full, and you can't touch it. So to Luda's point, there's there's lots of different nuances out there, and just because he's got all of this money doesn't mean that one, it's over. If you can't get access to it, there's other clever ways in order about going about that to do that. So
And that's the second hardest conversation, right? The first hardest conversation is, yeah, you got to pay more money to keep going. And the second hardest conversation is, okay, well, we found some assets, but you know what? We can't touch it. Right? And it wasn't until I started working with other lawyers from other states that I realized just how let's say special Florida is with all our protections and exemptions. We have quite a few, so it does get difficult, especially for people that know how to use them to their advantage, realistically. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's tough.
Texas is a lot like that too.
Yes.
Texas
Texas
is
is
another
also pretty
state that's
debtor
very
friendly.
protective
Yeah.
for the debtor, and you have to be creative and follow the money. But to the Luda's point before of yeah, whether it's a doctor or a dentist or whatever professional, you have to go to the professional. Imagine you're sitting there with a $48 million loss, in the example that I gave you. I already know when they come to me, price is not an issue, right? It's more of, hey, getting the specialist in order to do it, to find this, because no matter what they pay me is going to be pennies on the dollar compared to, the potential recovery of it. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's the type of person that just wants to believe that it's going to happen and will pay the guy that the person they think is the best.
Well, but you have no choice. You are in this situation if you don't do your due diligence. So you're handcuffed. You have to do something to walk away from that. You have investors, shareholders, those types of things. You have to show that you've done everything in your power in order to collect it. It's not collectible. And so again, different degrees of that, but what I would say today, if anybody could take out of it as it relates to Luda and what she does, and other asset attorney specialist, to understand you need someone like that who's a specialist that knows where to go, can be laser precision in order to go ahead and get that, and just understand you are just burning daylight if you're trying to do it on the cheap and going somewhere else. And the more daylight, the more time the bad guy has to go ahead and spend your money that they're in possession of, right? And so no matter what that is, spend the money for good advice, getting that, um, and you're just going to be much better off for it.
It sounds like with both of you, and it goes back to anything, even when I'm speaking on, like a marketing topic, it's just when you're in a situation with any type of meaningful stakes, go to somebody with experience and expertise that's willing to give you a direct explanation for what your situation looks like and what might happen down the road. Because as we all know, Luda, you hit on it, Brian, if, half hour ago you did, is when you have experience with something, you almost become like a fortune teller. You can tell what may is likely to happen, what may happen, and walk somebody through it. So I guess from the non-expert chair, it's just call and ask questions and walk the road of discovery.
Yeah, and I can tell Luda's cut from the same cloth. As you get older and the more experience you have, the reality at the end of the day is you're comfortable in your skin. It's a great place to be in life, to where you can just, sorry, not much sugar on this thing. I gotta just give it to you the way that it is. And my experience, the older I get, the clients really appreciate that upfront and honesty and
Sure.
transparency and things. And the reality is you're more likely to get retained because you are, in fact, just, straightforward and being honest.
I
And
always like to think of it as, when I go to the doctor, right? I don't know anything, right? I'm just like, here, I'm having this issue. I don't know what it means. Is it the worst? Is it not that bad? Like, and I'm like, how do I want the doctor to talk to me? What do I want the doctor to tell me? Like, and then I kind of think, man, I wonder if people that come to me with legal issues think the same way, right? They're nervous. They don't know what's going on. They don't, and I'm like, okay, how would I want my doctor to talk to me, and how honest do I want them to be? And kid gloves, not kid gloves. You get a feel for your client, right? And that's how I think when I speak to clients, right? Like, how do I think I would want to be explain something to? And that's just usually how I see it.
that I think to me is the best type of modern customer service you can really provide.
Yeah.
Um, my first sales manager 15 years ago told me to he always liked to explain things like a surgeon. It was the exact example you drew on, is sometimes you don't wanna hear it, but when you said, "I don't like to waste my time or the client's time, I just wanna be transparent," that just sounded like a Brian Bauer special almost verbatim.
Well,
It's the
that's why we
same.
connect so well, Brian and I.
It's so um, we've hit an hour. Brian, is there anything that, it's a great opportunity to have Luda on. Is there anything that you think that that is really important to hit on in Luda while he's thinking of that? Maybe close out with, what's a common situation that someone should reach out to you and don't, or maybe even not related to asset search? What should the everyday person know about your field?
Um, any time that you're getting involved in any kind of transaction on a handshake, which please don't never do that, but on a handshake, on a written agreement, I think collection really starts before things go bad, when people are still willing to share information. So and I did a talk on this in front of one of these groups that I'm in, right, 20,000 of them, and I said, look, because I do this, and this is the bulk of what I do, my mind, no matter what stage the client comes to me, whether it's, hey, can you help me with this agreement? My mind is always, okay, if something goes wrong and we win, right? How am I collecting? Can I collect? Because I think that before things go bad, when everything is still friendly, that is the time to take the precautions. Get the information, cover cover your butt. Make it easier for your lawyer in the future to help you. I actually have clients that come to me, usually businesses, right? And they say, hey, can you help me collect on my outstanding invoices? And we do that, right? And the next thing I do is I'm like, give me your contract. We're gonna look at your contract and we're gonna amend it for for future customers, so that if you ever come back to me, I have an easier time to collect, right? And there's certain provisions you can put in your agreements, to make the collection process easier. There's certain waivers. I mean, there's so many things. And I love when clients come to me and say, hey, listen, take a look at my contract with an eye for future problems, future collection. So that would be, I always like to think of collection from the very beginning, because that's when people are more willing to share information. When I have realtors, I'm like, hey, when you're renting out an apartment, get a questionnaire, get their information, get their last employment, get their bank statements, something. Assuming you can and it's legally proper, right? Um, because also what I like to do, and I don't know how other lawyers use asset investigators, but I've used big companies and I've used small companies. And I like, for example, I love the fact that I can call Brian and say, here's what I have. Here are the issues I'm seeing. What do you think? What do you think? Should we do something more than this particular search? Can you also look for this? And that's why I like, using asset search companies, where I could talk to the actual investigator, or at least somebody who's very much involved in the process, versus just some like customer representative that has to be the go-between. And it's just such a waste of time. So I think what I like about Phoenix is that I could just get Brian on the phone, for example, and say, hey, well, this is the case that I have. Here's the complications you're going to see. Here's the information I already have. What do you think? And in the past, I've actually been able to talk things out with the investigator. And he's like, you know what? I never thought of searching for this, but I think I can find it for you. Right. So, talk to the professionals, use companies where you can have a conversation, because they can help you, right? And sometimes someone like Brian can say, hey, have you thought about this angle? Because I did something like this X amount of time ago. Let's take a look at this. And I'm like, great, let's do it. I don't presume to think that I know everything. I love hearing new ideas. I geek out on this stuff like crazy. If there's a way for me to get creative and help my client, I'm doing it. And if that information comes from my knowledge, great. If it comes from somebody else's, please teach me something new, you know?
That's an incredible wrap up. Yeah, I do always kind of think it's wild. I touch a lot of different business types. It's really uncommon that you can pick up the phone and talk to a technician and an expert like Brian, who's typically like 3 complaints away from someone that you can talk to.
Mhm. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be Brian, but it's gonna be someone because I've already spoken to someone at the company. It's somebody who I know is the person doing the investigation or somehow has their hand on it, right?
Mhm.
Because how much easier is it to talk to that individual who's looked at the documents, who kind of, somebody called me from Brian's from Phoenix about the case that I submitted. I mean, this person knew the background of the case better than I have. I'm like, this is amazing, so and sometimes you need that. You need to understand the whole issue to know where to look. So
Well, that's quite an endorsement, Mr. Bauer.
Yeah, there's our marketing short right there.
there
I
you
was
go.
like, no comments needed.
There you go.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would just say to wrap up, appreciate your time, Luda. I just, it's a breath of fresh air to find, an attorney that understands true asset collection and enforcement and things. And there's just a lot of attorneys that certainly think that they can do it, but, ultimately don't have that expertise. And so yeah, I'm excited in the future to tap into your experience. So
Thank you. And this has been great, by the way. I
no,
thoroughly enjoyed this.
no, awesome. I mean, Luda, you're a great communicator, obviously, and you've got a great service mindset that matches up really well with the way we talk about things here. So really appreciate you coming on. And Brian, always thanks for your time.
okay, thanks.
Thank
Thanks.
you.